I'm presenting a couple of cases about single stage pull through for Hirschsprung disease by Duhamel's procedure. Last few years that I have seen pediatric surgery, I have noticed that there are a few things which have enabled single stage pull through by surgeons. The foremost is the availability of frozen section, by which we do not need or leveling can be done at the time of surgery itself. Then there was a big advent of Suaves or a transanal endorectal pull through, which is like a modified Suaves just from the transanal side. And there was a big wave for this surgery, but then the incontinence and the constipation rates were found to be a little higher than the Duhamel's. And anyway, most people are trained by doing Duhamel's in most centers. So then the question was, how do you do a safe Duhamel in a single stage? Then the staplers came in and laparoscopy came in. Most of the training that I have undergone is where we used to um, put neonates for under rectal washout, and if the neonate deflated, we would do an early pull through at 3 months in Birmingham, 6 months in Oxford, and then various centers are doing it at different times. All of those were undergoing laparoscopic Duhamel. I have two slightly different cases. Only difference is that their age and their presentation. So this was a 6-year-old younger sibling, a 6-year-old girl with a younger sibling who already had a 3-stage pull through. And then they realized that this older child must also be having the same thing because she was needing lots of enemas in her life. And the younger sibling, when the baby was born, had a colostomy. So this 6-year-old girl had constipation since birth and had frequent enemas and laxatives. She was otherwise well grown. I first undertook a rectal biopsy for her, which confirmed Hirschsprung's disease. She was on daily washouts. I kept her on daily washouts for a month, which I believed was necessary to adequately deflate her. And this is the photo during the surgery that she's nicely deflated before surgery. And she underwent an open Duhamel's procedure where you can see a rectosigmoid transition zone. And we use staplers for her. The next is a 3-year-old child who had severe constipation and distension since birth. This child was from abroad and was trying to come here in the last 1.5 years because of the lockdown, was not able to come. And the mother used to give enemas once in a while, but not every day. And the abdomen used to deflate, but not completely. Again, when they came here, I taught them rectal washouts because of limited time. I only was able to give it for a week. So this child we took up for robotic Duhamel, where we first took rectal biopsy and frozen sections to confirm the level. During that, we found that the level was in the upper descending colon, and hence the entire colon was dissected down. The retrorectal space was made. This is the retrorectal space being made. As you can see, the magnification is quite good, which is also similar in laparoscopy. Along the marginal, which you can see on the top, the left colic was taken and the middle colic was taken. The biopsy showed the level to be upper descending, and hence up to the hepatic flexion had to be mobilized. Here you see the left colic being taken, and soon enough you'll see the middle colic being taken. The robotic instruments, as you can see, they maneuver very nicely and give you a good not only view but also control for vessels. This is the middle colic. The other advantage is that you can see that in such a limited space, we are able to do this surgery, which would have been slightly more difficult by laparoscopy. However, the difficulty for this child was, as you will see shortly, that after all this dissection and mobilizing the entire, this is the splenic flexure. You can see the peristalsis in the colon, and you can see the nice marginal. But the problem was this colon was very huge to be handled robotically. and hence we had to open lowered abdomen for mobilize. Well, the mobilization was complete, but for the pull through, we had to open the lower abdomen, and the surgery was completed with the open assistance. The follow-up is the 6-year-old after 2 years is very well, does not have constipation, distension, or incontinence. And the 3-year-old, I only have a 1-month follow-up, but again is very well, and he's eating normal diet without any distension, constipation, incontinence. So in summary, I just want to discuss one stage Duhamel or any other kind of pull through if people have experience as a procedure for older children, particularly more than 1 year old. And there are this has been known since early 2000 or even earlier than that. And there's a paper from Dr. Paras Kothari sir also. So I just want to discuss it amongst the learned people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kant. I think since you have asked for a discussion and there are no questions on the chat box, I will just invite questions from the participants. And I will right now unmute everybody for now. Everybody can unmute themselves and ask whatever question.
Dr. Jay,
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Jay, can I ask a question? About there can be different way of operating the same procedure, as Dr. Kant said, whether by open surgery or laparoscopy or by the robotic. But their indication, the selection of the cases remains the same. I don't think we should violate those selections and the indications. For example, what you could see in this child, especially 6-year-old girl or a boy, I don't like the 6-year-old, but the colon is so massively distended. Even if we prepare the bowel, it is always we are going to ask for the trouble, especially when you're doing any retrorectal dissection, the colon is so dilated. Trying to get such a dilated bowel posterior to the rectum, trying to do anastomosis. I wanted to know more details about how he managed the dormal part, Kepler, how the upper end was tackled.
Sir, can I interrupt? Can everybody mute themselves till the time that they want to speak so that we can hear? Thank you.
Yeah, I will just repeat it again. Whichever the way you do the tech, whether by laparoscopy or by robotic or by open surgery, whether you do Duhamel, Swensson, or the interpreter pull-through, those are the different issues to be discussed separately. But what remains is that true, the basic principle of surgery remains the same. Whether you are doing even by the robotic surgery, the 6-year-old child, the colon is so massively distended, doing a primary pull-through for such a dilated colon, and then you're going to face a lot of difficulty in the lower part of the pelvic dissection, not only retrorectal dissection, but doing anastomosis, by stapler, even doing the upper end anastomosis. I will be more happy to know about how exactly it was managed about the staple, because the length required the staple here will be a little more. So whether we require to fire 2 staples from below as well as from upper end, what was done exactly at the upper end of the rectum, how it was managed to the pull down colon.
Okay,
So
Kant, could you explain?
Can you please highlight on this?
Kant, could you please explain the details, anatomical or operational details of the anastomosis and the staplers that were used, and the size of the staplers that were used?
Yeah, thank you, Manisha, for your question. I think it's very pertinent. So the upper end rectum to neorectum, I always do a hand-sewn anastomosis, and that is why I elected to do robotic in the second child, because the robot affords that better than laparoscopy. So the upper end is always hand-sewn. I don't use staplers for the upper end. You usually need to fire a stapler from below. If you use a 80 millimeters green stapler. So for both these children, I used a 80 millimeter green stapler, and I ensured that the old rectum, the rectal pouch, the old rectal pouch is not too big. If we make that too big, so you just have to spend a little more time going down right at the peritoneal reflection. And with that, usually the 80 stapler is enough. For the first child, 6-year-old,
one length is enough at length of the 80 to fire that whole common wall.
6-year-old, the one length was enough. For the 6-year-old, I had to fire a stapler from above. Yeah.
Exactly. This is what, because sometimes in the older patients, we need to fire it from also from above, from
Correct.
below as well as from above.
But it's
And,
not a difficult thing to do,
yes,
sir. It is
yes.
very
But
straightforward.
point is about the selection of case.
Yes.
Now, the
Yeah.
dilated colon
No,
becomes
Mane
not a
sir,
good case. Yeah.
Dr. Mane, we
Yes,
will
madam.
discuss this point a little later about this stapler. Gursev, can you unmute yourself and say what you are trying to explain on the chat?
Yeah, sorry, as Dr. Mane was saying, sir, staplers can be used. What I generally do is, I've done a couple of robotic dual mills. We use a laparoscopic stapler and use a 25 or a 45 cartridge depending upon the dilatation of the colon. And then you disconnect the colon using the laparoscopic stapler. That ensures that your feed remains clean. There is no spillage happening instead of doing an enterotomy. And then you pull it out. You fire one or two linear staplers from below to create the pouch. And in one patient, we have done a break to open it from above at all. But if you wish to open from above, do an enterotomy and put in a stapler from above, a laparoscopic stapler is very easy. And this
So
entire
you mean to say that you will you mean to say that you will fire a laparoscopic stapler from above and the same laparoscopic stapler from below also?
Yes.
Dr. Gursev, aware of that. I also use the same laparoscopic stapler, especially for a child below 6 months of age, because the other staplers which you use it to open surgery is quite a wide and it cannot be used in a below 6 months of age. So I regularly use even a 3-month age the laparoscopic stapler. But then the length required sometimes maybe even last centimeter to centimeter segment, which still we cannot crush in that stapler. So we need to fire one more from above, or
Yes.
if you take a stay on from the upper end, and then you divide the septum, and you can do it open, close, of the suturing of the septum. My point was,
Mane sir, you were talking about selection of the patient.
yeah, my point was about the first important point remains that selection of the dilated colon, doing a primary any procedure, whether you do Duhamel, whether you do laparoscopy, whether you do robotic. I will not be really happy to do such type of dilated colon and asking for more trouble. Once a while you can get along with that surgery, but doesn't mean if you have worked problem in the pelvis, it is not easy to handle over a period of time. And
Okay,
it gives a lot of post-op problems.
Kant, would you like to comment on this?
Can I comment on both the points? The
Yes.
first point is the staplers from above is really not difficult. Like Gursev mentioned that you fire a linear stapler, make sure there is no spillage. I disagree with Gursev that I don't leave a spurs. I always do an open enterotomy. I do a diamond ship anastomosis, and I always fire a stapler from above if I'm doing a lap or a robotic procedure for a Duhamel. So I will always fire a stapler from above, or unless my stapler from below is sufficient to cover the spur, but I definitely don't leave a spur.
Okay. Now the next, can you talk about the next point which Dr. Mane mentioned about patient selection?
The second
Can
point.
everybody else please mute themselves so that we can hear?
And the last point, Dr. Kant also
start meeting on Zoom.
the important point which Dr. Kant I think I
Government
got
hospital or
mentioned.
corporation hospital, one time private.
You will have-
Just one minute. Let me mute everybody. Wait.
If somebody is
private.
Hello? Zoe, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the second point I want to discuss is that definitely the whole point of this presentation is whether dilated colons can be brought down or not. When we started doing, when I started observing and assisting single stage surgeries in 2005 and 6, I realized that this sounded blasphemous when you're always been doing colostomies and you're trying to pull down slightly dilated bowels, even in a 3-month-old baby. But experience at that point showed that it is possible to do. You just have to be very meticulous. The important part is the neorectum to rectal anastomosis, the wall anastomosis of the posterior wall of old rectum and the neorectum anterior wall. That has to be very painstakingly meticulous, interrupted sutures. And once you have achieved that, the chances of it retracting are less. And then you fire a stapler, it does the job for you. Of course, getting
Okay, thank you.
Problem.
Now, actually, we need to go to the next case. We need to go to the next case.
The last
Yes,
point.
sir. Yes.
Dr. Kant, I don't know whether you really practice on that or not, but preferably whenever I do a normal pull through, I don't do really single stage, but I always do a two stage. That means what I do first is a colostomy, especially such a dilated colon is always safer to put a colostomy because a lot of depends upon your histology of the pull down bowel. You need to have a good histology pathologist or frozen section to comment on that. So any mistake in this, you are asking a trouble again for the redo surgery. So for such a single stage of procedures, unless you have good pathologist, one, second, dilated colons are not a really good happy to do a single stage. And third important point remains, one must always put a large bore catheter through the rectum across the anastomosis into the colon, which keeps you or the deflects the colon properly in postoperative period. It deflects the air as well as the liquid stool and can take care of the anastomosis.
Sir, I
This is
learned
what I
that
really
from
practice.
you. Sir, I learned that from you, and I put a 32 bore flexo. I learned that from you.
I know that, but then I think you have not mentioned that point, which is very
Yeah,
important
sorry,
because what
sorry.
happens when you
Sorry.
talk about this point, the someone who has not done this type of procedures, they don't go away with saying that it can be just managed easily.
I
It
understand.
requires lot of handling, lot of preparation. It requires putting a catheter properly to deflate the bowel properly. Then only you can achieve some type of result.
We have to go to the next presentation. The
Hmm.
next presentation is Dr. Devendra Taide. Devendra, can you share your screen? Kant, you'll have to stop sharing.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Devendra.
Yeah. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a pleasant afternoon in Thane, and waiting for the rains to come. This one evening, I received a call from a hospital that an 2-year-old child was admitted with an injection of a foreign body in the foreign body. So when they sent the X-ray to me, there's a foreign body is seen at the cricopharyngeal end. There's a ring. So we went there, did a scopy, and removed the foreign body, the ring. But the child had an unusual widening of mouth on the right side with few skin tags, one at the angle of mouth, another at the preauricular tag, you can see. So we planned for correction of this defect. After routine investigations for preoperatively, also we did ultrasound of KOB, which showed normal. And then after we prepared him for the surgery, and after nasal intubation and marking of the mucosal edges for determine the neocommissure and maintaining the symmetry with the opposite side. Dissection was carried out. Uh, as you can see, the excess mucosa and the skin is excised, and the excess tissue is dissected out and discarded. The mucosa, buccal mucosa, is separated from the orbicularis muscle dissection so as to keep adequate muscle for mobilization. The skin and the subcutaneous tissue is also separated from the orbicularis muscle. A suture is placed at the neocommissure to assess the cosmesis. The buccal mucosa is sutured, taking thick bites with absorbable suture in straight line. The neocommissure suture is done. The orbicularis muscle is approximated and sutured in overlapping manner so as to achieve adequate bulk for better osmosis and function. The skin tag is excised. And the skin incisions are sutured using 70 Prolene simple sutures. And this is the post-operative picture after completion of the suturing. And this is after 12 days, the sutures were removed. The Traziers classified facial clefts into 0 to 14, depending on the location. They were divided into midline cleft, orbital, and lateral cleft. This was a lateral cleft type 7. Transverse lateral cleft is also called as tracheus type 7 or microstomia, is a rare cleft with incidence of 1 is to 80,000 to 1 is to 3 lakhs of live birth. It's mostly in males, 3 is to 2 ratio. It's mostly isolated event but can be associated with other syndromes like Goldenhar or teacher Collins. The features include absence of zygomatic arch, variable deformity of mandible at mandibular ramus, condyle or coronate process, and hypoplasia of the maxillary alveolus. There can be maxillary duplication that might be present as supernumerary dentition, maxillary cleft in the molar region and between the maxillary tuberosity and the pterygoid process. Soft tissue involvement includes microstomia, ear abnormalities, temporalis muscle abnormalities, and absence of auricular hair. Cleft is most commonly on the unilateral, but can be sometimes have bilateral thing, and it does not exceed the anterior border of masseter muscle. It involves all layer of the cheek, including skin and subcutaneous tissue, muscles and mucosa, and normal attachment of the muscles like residuous zygomatic major depressor angular muscles is altered on the cleft side. Repair of this cleft is needed to achieve improvement in feeding, speech, improve the speech ability and facial appearance. The management includes in the infancy the repair of microstomia or any other cleft associated with airway management. Then if there is bony deformities, excision of the bone overgrowth or grafting at the age of 5 to 10 years, and orthodontic surgeries after completion of the bony growth. The steps in the micro osseous repair include correct marking placement for neocommissure on the cleft side, which is guided by the measurements on the normal side. Excision of the excess tissue, mucosa, and the skin so as to approximate at the angle of mouth. Dissection of the orbicularis oris muscle so as to achieve adequate closure and approximation of the tissue. Commissuroplasty can be done with direct suturing of the mucosal end, or it can be achieved by superior or inferior vermilion flap. Oculus muscle can be approximated in simple with taking thick bites, or overlapping suturing can be done to provide strength and better osmosis. Oral mucosa can be closed in the straight line most probably, or it can be done as a Z-plasty if the tissue is deficient. skin closure can be done in straight line, as there is not much transposition, but a Z-plasty or a W-plasty can be achieved if the tissues there is a deficiency and if there isn't major transposition. These are the references. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Devendra. Devendra, you have got a lot of compliments from everybody. I will read some out. Dr. Sanjay Oak has said, my compliments to Dr. Devendra Taide for attempting an uncommon case and doing a good job. Dr.
Thank
Paras
you.
Kothari has also appreciated. Also, there is one question.
Yeah.
What investigate, Dr. Uttarwar has asked, what investigations should you do, pre-op, CT or MRI for facial anatomy?
We're planning for an CT scan, 3D reconstruction CT scan. If we see any abnormalities after 2 or 3 years, and accordingly we'll plan for any corrective surgeries required.
Okay, so your preferred investigation would be a CT.
CT 3D.
Okay, Dr. Yogendra Sanghvi has said he has very well done. I had 2 cases recently. I feel that incorporation of Z-plasty helps in suture line, helps on longer run. For Dr. Mane said, for any cleft repair, we must suture muscles first. You have any comment on that?
Muscle stress also, because I was sutured first, but muscle adequate visualization of the muscle was done.
Okay.
And only orbicularis muscle was sutured.
Okay. All right. So, one minute, let me just see. For Dr. Yogendra Sanghvi has said, for my cases, it was okay to suture mucosa first. Okay. 1 minute, I'm just trying to unmute. It's not happening. Okay. Whoever wants to ask any questions can unmute themselves and ask the questions. Yes, Dr. Mani.
Comment again about the clay part. As when we routinely do any clay clip or clay palette surgery, and especially when you do clay clip surgery, the most important part remains is the approximation of muscles first. If you approximate the muscle first, then usually there never been a UA or a breaking, or there never been an indentation again. So whether you do leap, clay clip or any angle of surgery, if you approach the muscle first, it gives a better appearance than doing the mucosa and the skin repair. So this is what the plastic surgery technique, especially for the clay clip. Suturing the muscles is important because that is the important part of the repair, not exactly the mucosa approximation. Mucosa eventually is going to come properly. It is not going to be a difficult job. But muscle approximation under vision, though its angle is important, is not a difficult job. But especially when doing a clay clip repair, approximation muscle is the first done, others first.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Devendra. Can we go to the next speaker now? I invite Dr. Vishal Sawant to present his case.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to present a rare and a complex case which has no clear-cut guidelines in the literature. There are various options from no treatment at all to partial correction or complex multiple surgeries. One has to address the issue on case-to-case basis. A lot of psychological trauma to the child and lots of concern about future and overall quality of life and ethical dilemma for the treating surgeon. I'm presenting this case for the second time. I'm actually sorry, it may be a repetition for many of you. This was a firstborn female child, non-consanguineous marriage, single, normal spontaneous vaginal delivery at 33 weeks. The baby cried at birth. The birth weight was 1.9 kilo. There was no significant antenatal history, and there was no any medications by the mother. Antenatal sonography was reported to be normal. The child was noticed to have double external genitalia, 2 separate anal openings, and swelling at the back. Hence, the baby was referred to NICU for further management. On examination, there were no dysmorphic features. The cry tone activity was normal. The child hemodynamically was stable. The RS and CVS examination was normal. Per abdomen, there was no mass lump palpable. The pelvis was wide with pubic diastasis, and there was shortening of right lower limb. On perineal examination, there was duplication of vulva as seen here with a separate opening of urethra and vagina in each vestibule. The urethra and vagina were seen within the vestibule. The anus opening were there, 2 openings. One was anteposed on the right side and the left side was normal anus. There was dribbling of urine from the right-sided urethra, and there was intermittent leakage of meconium from the right side anus. The left anus appeared normal. There was no dribbling from the left side urethra. Examination of the back showed a lumbar vertebra and sacral vertebra were fell down up to the coccyx towards the left anal opening, and there was a skin-covered, soft, fluctuant, and compressible swelling to the right of sacrum. The double natal cleft left was complete, and the right was the left was complete and the right was incomplete. The X-ray was done, which showed normal alignment of lumbar vertebra with deviation of sacrum slightly to the left. There was no widening of any lumbosacral region. No obvious duplication of sacrum was seen. There was pubic diastasis, significant pubic diastasis with malalignment of the pelvic bones. Abdominal ultrasound was done, also showed 2 hemibladders, 2 hemiuteri. Both kidneys were normal in morphology without hydronephrosis. There was no pelvic mass like hydrocorpus. 2D echo done was normal. In the neonatal period, baby was observed for any GI or various symptoms, and general care of the preterm was given. Baby was started on feeds gradually and increased to full feeds, and the baby was passing urine and stool well from both respective openings. The baby was, after sufficient observation, was discharged for detailed evaluation at a later date and was asked to report back if symptomatic. At 2.5 months of age, a contrast study was done to delineate the anatomy as much as possible. Both the bladders were seen after cannulating both the urethras. The left side bladder looked relatively normal configuration. The right bladder looked little smaller in size with a small diverticulum, and the bladder neck was little patulous. It was not possible to take a proper micturating film as the one or the other bladder would empty during filling phase. The same contrast was instilled into through the anus and anatomy of the rectum, as well as the distal sigmoid colon and the distal colon was demonstrated. However, it was even by applying pressure, it was not possible to get to the confluence. MRI was also done, which showed a classic hypomyelomeningocele. MRI of the abdomen showed 2 separate kidneys, each having a ureter of its own and draining into ipsilateral bladder. There were 2 hemiuteri, with each one draining into the respective vagina. The same findings. Nerve conduction studies also showed a lesion in the right peroneal and tibial nerve. The left side was normal. So it was planned to do a stage repair. The first stage was cystal genitoscopy with repair of lipomeningocele was planned after 6 months, and the repair of genitourinary and bowel anomaly was planned after the first birthday. And orthopedic management with pubic diastasis and tendon transfer, if any, was to be planned at a later date by the orthopedic surgeon. During the lipomeningocele repair, cystogenitoscopy was performed, which showed on the right side, the bladder was so more wide mouth diverticulum at the fundus, and the ureter was seen close to the sphincter. At vaginoscopy on the right side revealed the cervix. However, left side it could not be visualized. Left bladder was smooth walled. Left ureteric orifice was normally placed and normal configuration. Lipomeningocele was repaired as usual. I would not go much into the details of this. It was uneventful. These are the steps of surgery. The wound healed well. There was no crying pulse and further deterioration in neurological function clinically, as well as on repeat nerve conduction study, which was performed after 2 months. Now the planning for the second stage was decided. there were some expectations by the mother. She wanted the external genitalia to look as normal as possible. She was also concerned about the gait of the child because of the shortening of the limb, and also about the fertility potential, but she was not much concerned at this stage about the fertility. I had lots of concern. I wanted, how to deal with the duplicated bladder and the genitalia. I was trying to see if is it possible to preserve both without causing any further problems. Is it possible? And also at the same time, I was thinking whether it is possible to give normal appearing genitalia without excising one. Will complete removal of one-sided duplicated organs affect the continence of the other side due to extensive perineal dissection involved? And there was no much concern about getting one of the duplicated bowel out. Another concern which I had was whether I should stage this procedure, whether should I do a GI and genital reconstruction in 2 different stages. Is the pelvic osteotomy needed during genital reconstruction or no? And all the time I was worried of causing more damage and potential complications to this baby. Otherwise, would have led life would have been normal of this child, except for the anomaly. Fortunately for me, there was a Deccan meet, and I had an opportunity to interact with renowned faculty in pediatric urology in the country, as well as Mr. Philip Ransley, who was in Goa for the meet. I had a lot of discussion, and then multiple counseling sessions were held with the mother. And mother was more concerned about the appearance and was not in favor of too many surgeries. She wanted me to do as little number of surgeries to try and correct the anomalies as possible. The final plan was, considering her request, it was decided to remove all right-sided duplicated organs, as I thought preserving these organs would create more problems and may require more surgeries to correct them. The choice between the right and left was very easy for me because the right-sided looked more abnormal. The anus was antiplos, it was spatulous, the urine, there was dribbling of urine. As well as on nerve conduction studies, there was weakness in the right-sided limb. The meningomyelocele was also protruding towards the right side. Considering all this factor, I decided to go ahead and remove the right-sided organs and preserve the left. So at 1 year and 10 months of age, cystogenitoscopy was repeated here again because I was not sure of the left cervix in the first endoscopy. So, however, I could see the left cervix at this time. You can see here the anteposed anus and patulous anus on the right side. So the patient was under anesthesia in lithotomy position, and initially a decision was made to do a perineal dissection. The implicating sutures were taken to expose the vestibule, and the whole the urethra, vagina, as well as the rectum as one unit, like how we mobilize the cloaca, was mobilized right as high as possible. Then abdomen was opened, and the right-sided duplicated colon that was extending from rectum, sigmoid to the ascending colon right up to almost near the splenic flexure was resected. These are the 2 duplicated bladders, and this is right hemiuteri, this is left hemiuteri. Both the ovaries were normal. This is after the right rectum sigmoid has been already excised. The colon on the right side was removed, and there was a common wall which was stapled. There was a common wall in the upper descending colon which was stapled with a linear cutter stapler. The right side of the bladder and the right hemiuterus were completely excised, which was very simple. It was easier than I expected. Then the ureter on the right side was implanted into the left bladder by extravesical technique, how we do in renal transplant. So this was the mucosa exposed. This is bladder muscle which was opened, and the ureter was reimplanted. And after making, only my concern was there was little bit of tension on the ureter, and I was worried of doing a swas hitch or a Boari flap because the bladder was small, and I didn't want to disturb the bladder as far as possible. I didn't want to touch the superior fascicle pedicle for fear of causing more neurological damage on the left side. These are the resected segments formalized. This is the colon, this is the bladder, and this is the uterine horn. The patient was followed for 11 months after surgery. She was discharged on chemoprophylaxis. Double J stent was removed after 4 weeks. Chemoprophylaxis were continued for a month after removal stent. There was no dribbling of urine or fecal leak, no UTI, no hydronephrosis ultrasound done at 2 months. And the family was happy. They were happy with the results so far. This is how the perineum looked at the time, neonatal period. This is before surgery. This is before discharge from the hospital. And this is on one of the follow-ups. I did an MCU because I was concerned about, though the child never developed UTI, I did an MCU after 7 months. And unfortunately, there was a low-grade reflux. But one thing is that the PC system has completely emptied on post-wide film. So I am treating this reflux conservatively. I initially put some antibiotics for a few days, and now patient is off chemoprophylaxis. There are certain future concerns regarding this baby. The gluteal contour and the pelvic girdle restoration. As you can see, there is one additional cleft which has developed here, which needs to be corrected, but there is underlying bony deformity. So unless the bony deformity is corrected, it may be difficult to reconstruct this. So a combined orthopedic and a plastic surgeon's surgical reconstruction is planned sometimes in the future, which my colleague orthopedic surgeon has been asked to decide. And I'm worried about there is a low grade, I'm a little worried about the reflux, which is a sort of a complication of this procedure. The fertility issues will be there, but that will be sorted out later on. Thank you for a patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Mane, Dr. Nitin Hubbalkar, and Dr. Sanghvi have appreciated your management. And can I ask Dr. Paras Kotari to give his comments on this?
Actually, Joey, we also had a case similar to this case. This was a female child. We had a male child. I think we presented in the last meeting also. He has double bladder, means with a small, you can say like a partition in between the two bladder, but both are functional. He has only a single penis with both the urethra opening in the glans. So we are not planning to do anything for that. We have repaired the lipomeningocele and the patient is fine. The only problem is that he had an ARA. That means he has no anal openings. And the rectum, what we can say, I will not like to say that it is an sigmoid colon or something like that, because it aspires the levator ani, because we have got an MRI done, and it has come down till you can say one inch from the skin verge. The only problem is like in Vishal's case, where there were two openings and in between there was a fat pad. We also have a fat pad in between. We have taken the patient for examination under anesthesia, where we have come to know that the right-sided muscle and the left-sided muscle have been splitted. The levator ani have been splitted by a fat mass in between it. And the right side muscle is, you can say, having a good power, but the left is not having very good power. So now we are waiting for the child for another 3 months to turn 1 year. And then we are planning to do a abdominal perineal PSRP with wrapping of the left and the right levator ani to the rectum, and hope that he becomes continent also. But we are not planning to do anything for the urinary system, because he's continent with both the bladders, with both the urethras.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Kirtane, would you have any comments on this case?
I would say that it is executed very well. Am I audible?
Yes, madam.
I had a similar case in Jaslok several years back. I think that was the time we had MIS conference also in somewhere near Pune. And this girl had exactly the same thing, caudal duplication completely, and a wide perineum with widely split pubic symphysis. So it is a technical and surgical challenge, definitely. And I would like to congratulate Vishal for an excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. I think we will go on to the next case by Dr. Gursev. Gursev, please present your case.
Am I visible? Can you see
Yes.
my?
You are not visible. We are audible.
Yeah, I mean, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Very good afternoon, respected seniors and all my colleagues. I'm going to talk about a short experience we have had where we have been planning exploratory laparoscopies for low birth weight and extremely low birth weight babies. The idea was that we are already, I think many of us are doing planned laparoscopic surgeries for duodenal atresia, deaf babies and all. But there is still a part of conundrum of these NICU babies where I think laparoscopy can still be useful. This was a 900-gram, 28-week baby, preferred in view only for actually extreme prematurity. Was admitted and on day 3 of admission and actual day 5 of life, found to have sudden onset of distension of abdomen. X-ray revealed gas in the diaphragm, so we proceeded with putting in a drain in the right iliac fossa. The child did improve after that, but as it happens in most of these cases, there was very little progress after that. He didn't drain any bile, any stool from the colon. Only air came out. But he always had this fixed loop in the right hypochondrium. And after passing stool for the first 2-3 days, there was no passage of stools after that. Then the whole point was, how do we proceed from here? Does he have an NEC with a stricture because the child was otherwise stable, and or does he have an atresia? So in a 900 grammer, it becomes a little difficult to decide how to proceed in these cases. So what we have now started doing is doing a diagnostic laparoscopy. And since he was small, we do a bedside laparoscopy, put in a small 5 millimeter balloon port from the umbilicus, and just have a look at the bowel. What does it look like? As you can see,
Gurusev, please unmute yourself.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So as you can see, there isn't much of space to do anything, but the whole purpose of these laparoscopies is to actually just look at the bowel and see whether there's any NEC active or passive or going on, or can we pick up any atresias in these cases. As I'll proceed forward, you can actually appreciate type 1 atresia here, where there is this fluid-filled meconium-filled proximal loop, which then goes on to form a collapsed bowel after that. So we knew that this child is not having any kind of an NEC, and it's probably likely that he had a ileal atresia. And then we proceeded with a very minimal laparotomy in the midline, extending the midline incision itself, and finding that he did have a type 1 atresia. Obviously, we did a loop ileostomy out from the drain site, and what it did for us was left him with a very small umbilical scar, followed by a colostomy. He's still awaiting closure. He's discharged. He's at 2.4 kgs, and we're expecting to do this closure by about 3.5 kgs. So far, we've done 4 such cases, all less than 1.5 kg, ranging in from 900 gram to 1.4 kg, and age being somewhere around 29 weeks to 31 weeks. All of them presented either with a perforation or with distension of abdomen with suspicion of either an NEC or an atresia. 2 of them had no gangrene and no atresia. One had bowel gangrene, and which we did explore, and one of them had an ileal atresia. Technical aspect, we've been using 5 millimeter 30 degree or a 0 degree telescope in these patients. After using normal ports for small babies, we find the balloon ports work better. There is less chance of dislodgement if you're planning to continue it for a longer period of time. Insufflation pressure is usually 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury. And in fact, in this patient, we have been using only a 20 cc syringe to insufflate. No positive pressure being applied at all. The total operative time, as I said, it's usually just an exploratory diagnostic lab, has been around 10 minutes, between 7 minutes to 13 minutes. And contrary to all fears, all these babies handled this laparoscopy very well with no changes in their hemodynamic parameters. For us, it has been that it avoids an unnecessary laparotomy. Diagnosis can be made with a small incision, has a very high predictive value for newborns who are suspected to have NEC. All of them have been done bedside, so it needs a slightly specialized setup. I don't think it needs advanced skills because it's just a diagnostic laparoscopy. It's more about observation. And of course, it's not feasible in all newborns. You expect them to be at least hemodynamically stable before you can plan for a laparoscopy. If he's unstable, then of course you need to go for a laparotomy. There has been enough literature on this so far, And people have published larger series regarding this, and I think there is some role for very specific indications for an exploratory laparoscopy for a low birth weight or an extreme low birth weight infants. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gursev, for an excellent presentation, and as usual, being on the cusp of something new. There is a question for you from Dr. Kant. A very nice demonstration, Gursev. Did you use any instruments? How did you mobilize bowel to confirm atresia?
Okay, so no, in this case we did not use any instruments because we were just trying to look into to confirm whether this was an NEC or was it or an atresia. So we didn't need to move. The visualization of that type 1 atresia was purely incidental, to be very honest, in this case. In other cases, we have used 2mm instruments. We have Karl Stoll's 2mm instruments with us, and it of course needs extreme care because even these 2mm instruments can damage the bowel to some extent. So what we use is usually a 2mm suction catheter to just move the bowel around. Just try to have a look inside. The main purpose being to rule out whether there's an ongoing NEC which needs active management or not. Having said that, yes, there are studies where they have said used Dopplers and transabdominal ultrasounds to look for NEC patches, but they are more they are not really sensitive and specific so far, and that's what our NSU has been using till now. But I think this does help. It needs a little bit of a workup and more experience on our part also. But I think
Yeah, because I think most people who start doing this will have a little bit of concerns about, pointy instruments being used in delicate.
Agreed. So, like I said, it's purely an exploratory lab.
Yes.
They're not
So,
planning
Dr. Shama has said very nice and new concept of bedside laparoscopy. Dr. Ravi Ramadwar has congratulated you. Dr. Mane has said, I thought plain X-ray abdomen is enough for diagnosis of intestinal atresia. Why to complicate matters? So we will discuss this a little later. I would invite Dr. Sandesh Parelkar, since he is there currently, to give his comments on this presentation. Dr. Parelkar? Yes, sir. Dr. Parelkar?
Yes. Sorry, Zui, I have no experience with laparoscopy, bedside laparoscopy. So I would like to just congratulate Gursev and hope that we also start doing this diagnostic laparoscopy.
Thank you for your encouraging words, sir. I think, Gursev, another question for you is that could you describe a little bit about what you mean by balloon ports?
Okay, so Applied Medical has come out with 5mm and 10mm ports, which actually have an additional channel. Normally, we have just one channel in most of these ports through which we can insufflate gas. I wish I had one with me, which I could just show you, but unfortunately, I don't have. So this one has a balloon about 0.5 centimeter from the lower tip.
Okay.
Once you put the port inside, it has a separate channel through which you can inflate this balloon, and that prevents dislodgement of these ports. And we have found them extremely useful in newborns in such cases, and also in vesicoscopic ureteric reimplant, where again you are worried whether your port gets dislodged if your bladder has not been fixed properly. So that kind of circumvents port dislodgement as a problem for doing laparoscopy in small children. They are available with Applied Medical, and they, I think, cost about only 300 rupees more than a standard non-balloon port. There's not much of a price difference between the two.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Rasiksha, would you like to comment on this presentation?
Not really. I mean, I would agree with Dr. Mane. I mean, plain X-ray should be able to tell us between the NEC versus atresia. So we need to, I mean, because we can do laparoscopy does not mean we should do it. So there has to be proper indications for doing it. That is what I would say. I mean, if you are really suspecting NEC for sure, yes, you can do it to find out whether it is a gangrenous bowel, and then you can do accordingly. But atresia has a different findings, and it can be diagnosed on plain X-ray.
Gurusev, do you have anything to say?
No, like I said, we already went in suspecting NEC in most of these patients. Even in this patient, he actually had a prior gas under diaphragm. And all the indications would suggest that he probably has an NEC rather than an atresia. The atresia was a purely incidental pickup.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to make Kant host, and I will proceed to my presentation. Okay.
Hi, Zoe, continue.
Yeah, I'll just. Okay. There was a 1 month old female baby, 3.2 kg weight. Birth weight was 2.7 kg. There were no perinatal issues after birth. She presented with fever and loose stools since 5 days and per rectal bleeding since 2 days. So this was copious, fresh red blood clots. However, baby was feeding very well. There was no vomiting. She was treated with oral antibiotics for 3 days before admission. When I saw the baby had tachycardia, but abdomen was very soft. There was a little bit of sort of a distension on a little asymmetric distension on the right side, non-tender. So investigations, CBC showed hemoglobin 11.5, WBC count was 12,270 with lymphocytosis. Platelets were 3,59,000. CRP, PCT were little high. Electrolytes were normal. However, the odd finding was that the INR was 1.6. Rapid antigen RT-PCR were negative since we do it for all patients. A sonography was done which showed a sort of a query collection or a thick walled viscous structure or a bowel loop on the right side of the lower abdomen with adjacent bulky right ovary. So on sonography, it was not really clear at the time of admission whether this is like a duplication cyst or whether this is a collection or what exactly it is. So a CT, so in 24 hours meanwhile, hemoglobin dropped from 11 to 9, CRP increased, INR became 2. So this was all a little confusing. When CT abdomen was done, it showed this sort of a viscous collection on this side. This is the ovary which can be seen. And the CT, this collection was said to be applied to the tip of appendix. This was around 20 cc with pushing the sigmoid colon to the left. And it was probably what it suggested was a sealed off perforation of appendix. In the next 48, what I did after that is because the INR was very high, I immediately put a right iliac fossa drain, 30 cc pus was drained. But in the pus culture, there was no organism detected. Baby was feeding well, meanwhile, surprisingly, passing stools, but the per rectal bleeding continued. After 48 hours, baby also had vaginal bleeding. There was mild abdominal distension, which was not there before. On sonography, that there was still collection, which had gone to the pelvis. There was further drop. So after we had transfused, again the hemoglobin dropped. D-dimer was 1,680. COVID antibody was positive, but 11 is not a very strong titer. So it was a little weak. So I did a laparotomy because it was not settling down. This was the cecum. This is the base of appendix, and the appendix had completely sloughed off. This is the other end. This is the sigmoid colon, which has come to wall it off on the right side. There was free pus in the abdominal cavity. This is the drain site. So this cecal end which was open, so I sutured this, and a covering ileostomy was done. Post-op, child did not immediately do well. It was quite rocky, went into septic shock, was ventilated, settled slowly. So basically this was a case of neonatal appendicitis. It's a very rare surgical condition with an incidence of 0.05, 04 to 0.2% and high mortality. There are around 141 cases during the period of 1901 to 2000 with a 70 to 80 perforation rate. So there are many theories regarding neonatal appendicitis. So till 2003, these were the theories which were in place. One is either it is a part of NEC if it occurs within 2 months and it is said to occur more in preterm males. Whether any obstructive conditions contribute to this like Hirschsprung disease or meconium ileus, and whether there is vascular insufficiency like cardiac defects, perinatal asphyxia or hypoxic states. In 2015, there's a very good study by Athena, which is documented by Dr. Ravin Thiran. And in that, maximum cases till now are reported from India. Generally, there is no difference in male to female ratio. Term infants now are being more affected than preterms. And there is no single report of cystic fibrosis or meconium ileus, so that theory is gone. There is only 4 cases of Hirschsprung disease with inflamed appendix. It seems to be a part, or it is difficult to distinguish from NEC. Most of the children were opened or for NEC but found to have appendicitis. As Gurse said, we could have done a laparoscopy here, but I did not even think about it because child's INR was not great and I was a little worried. But yes, this was a good case for doing a laparoscopy. And only 3 were correctly diagnosed prior to laparotomy in all these cases. So present analysis confirms the traditional view that infection of perforated appendix is purely evolved in a newborn, but appendicular abscess was noted only in 9 infants. There is disturbingly high mortality even now of 23% for neonatal appendicular perforation. The association of neonatal appendicitis with PR bleeding, there are only 2 cases, out of which one I have published last year, which was a case which turned out to have tip of appendix perforating in the terminal ileum. We had to do a resection anastomosis of the ileum, and later on the child was found to have cow milk protein allergy. So once that was taken away from the mother's diet and later on from the child's diet, they did very well. Currently now, also there was a little bit question whether this is post-COVID syndrome, post-COVID inflammatory syndrome, but it doesn't fit into this that there is no other microbial cause of inflammation because it evidently had an appendicular perforation. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Zoe.
Thanks.
I'll just read out some comments to you first. So Dr. Mane has asked whether a plain X-ray abdomen was done.
Plain X-ray abdomen was done. However, patient has got discharged, so I did not have the X-ray. The bowel loops were shifted to the left. However, there was no dilatation in the first X-ray. There was dilatation in subsequent X-ray before we decided to do a laparotomy.
Okay. And Dr. Sanghvi has asked whether any biopsy was taken. Did you consider Hirschsprung's at any point?
No, because baby was passing stools very well in the first month, and even during the process, after we put a drain, after that also baby was passing stools very well. So now also baby is passing stools very well. So no, that was not one of my differentials.
In your literature search, because you've got 2 cases of neonatal appendicitis now, have you found any association of Hirschsprung's and appendicitis?
Yeah, so earlier till reports till 2003, they had mentioned a theoretical association, but in the cases of around 170 cases which were studied till 2015, only 4 cases were of Hirschsprung disease and that had no other. There was a Hirschsprung. There was a definite history of delayed meconium.
Okay. Sangvi
Can
sir,
you hear me?
comments, please.
Yes.
Yeah, Sangvi sir, I would like your comments, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I had a 3-month-old child similar to this with the Hirschsprungs, and everybody ignored about the with appendicitis, and everybody ignored about Hirschsprung's part, and that child came after 3 months with a full-fledged Hirschsprung. So we should not ignore in this child that there is Hirschsprung is not a possibility.
Okay.
Sir, if you found Hirschsprungs, would you take a rectosigmoid biopsy or a rectal biopsy? Or if you were worried about it?
You are asking me?
Yeah, I mean, no, I'm asking actually Sangvi sir. Sangvi sir, if you were worried about Hirschsprungs in this situation, what kind of biopsy would you advise?
I would either take a suction biopsy with the calretinine levels or a rectosigmoid biopsy, extramucosal. If I am doing laparoscopy, it is possible very well. If I am doing the laparotomy also, I should be able to do it.
Okay. Dr. Jadhav has commented that rectal biopsies should be done in such cases. I remember listening to some presentation by Dr. Kanishka Das that a long segment Hirschsprungs or a total colonic agangliosis may have normal rectosigmoid biopsy, and hence
My only contention with this is that if the child has been thriving well since birth,
correct.
And even while a process is going on, the child is passing stools well. When this child had a fresh PR bleeding, I did not really want to fiddle around with a high INR.
No, I totally agree. So I was about to summarize that probably in this case, I'm sure that you had considered and you have not thought about it because this does not fit anywhere close to it.
It didn't fit, but the point is well taken that Hirschsprung disease may be diagnosed late also. I should keep that in mind. But at that time, I did not feel like taking a biopsy because already the child had rectal bleeding and I did not want to take that chance.
I think extramucosal biopsy should not have mattered with the rectal bleeding, isn't it?
The problem was that it was there were pus flakes everywhere and the sigmoid was badly stuck to the site of the...
Okay, fine.
So
operative difficulty only you will know.
Yeah, so I was just
Correct,
thinking that if it bleeds, I did not want to create any other problems there.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Okay, Dr. Jadhav, do you want to comment? I think he's been writing on the thing. I'm trying to unmute him. Dr. Sridhakar Jadhav, sir, would you like to comment?
I don't.
You're on 2 phones. We'll have to remove. We'll have to.
I don't recommend any biopsy during this operative procedure when the child is in moribund state. But all such cases, we should keep in mind in future to have a rectal biopsy to rule out Hirschsprung.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. And Dr. Sandesh Padikar's team has said thank you to everybody. Dr. Vishal Sawan says we can observe for symptoms of Hirschsprungs. And yeah, I think everybody agrees that in this situation,
I think we will ask Dr. Manjusha to conclude.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I'll have to unmute her, or maybe I can just unmute all. No? Can I unmute all?
Yeah, unmute all. And
I've asked everyone to unmute. Whoever wants to make some comments is welcome.
Yeah, actually, can I say something?
yes, madam.
Yes, Zui, I totally agree with you, given the circumstances and the sepsis that the child had, and also coupled with the fact that the child was passing stools very well and was healthy and feeding well. I wouldn't have also done any biopsy. So I fully agree with you there.
Thank you, madam.
So, can I say?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Please.
sir.
Yeah, I agree with everyone, because see, the child, we are exploring for the emergency laparotomy for a perforated something with a bad peritonitis. Even there is underlying Hirschsprung disease, there is no need to do immediately something, taking a biopsy. One can let the child stabilize. Even maybe before discharge, you can take a rectal biopsy. There is no harm doing it. Or maybe in the first follow-up, we can explain to the parents that you can take a rectal biopsy. So there is no rush to go for the rectal biopsy.
Yes, currently there is an ileostomy in place.
Yeah. But my only question remains, to not necessarily with this particular presentation, is the as a surgeon, probably with any child who comes with something suspected acute abdomen,
X-ray.
something like that, I would prefer to do a first plain X-ray abdomen rather than going for any CT scan or other.
Yes. No, X-ray was done. X-ray was done. I just
But
don't
a plain
have it.
X-ray abdomen is enough for us to make a comment on that ball pattern, the positioning, all these things, to say whether the child requires the intervention or not. One can, of course, go ahead with a sonography or CT scan if you're not convinced about the plain X-ray and you go need for surgery.
Yes,
Then
sir.
these additional information are required just to support your plan of action. But by far and large, most of the surgical cases, plain X-ray is enough to make a diagnosis and intervention for surgery.
So I would like to explain, in this, when the X-ray was done, there was no bowel dilatation. The bowel was shifted to the, let me finish. Can I finish? So the bowel was shifted to the left, and the sonography was not sure whether there is a duplication or there is a collection. Meanwhile, the child was bleeding. So I really, to make the decision on whether I should put a drain or whether I should open with an INR of 2, that was the reason why a CT was done. But definitely, with any abdominal case, we would always do a plain X-ray of the abdomen.
Any other comments, please, before we conclude, before Dr. Manjusha concludes?
I will take it. Oh, thanks. Congratulations.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Manjusha.
Yeah, thank you, Zui and Kant. Can I, are we, is there any other, anybody wants to speak? Okay, thank you, Zui and Kant, for the moderating this clinical meeting. There are many teaching institute, private institute, as well as some private practitioners who are in the line for clinical presentation. So I will discuss with Ramadwar sir and Tutla sir about this, and we might switch on to the twice a month presentation. And about that, we'll keep you informed. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the participants.
Thank you, Dr. Manjusha, for taking such a keen interest and organizing these meetings.
Thank you, everyone. And we must thank Dr. Professor Ravi Kanodia also for helping out with the Zoom stuff.
You can't. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.